How to correctly expose the foreground when shooting at night. Hello, PhotoPiller, Rafael the Bar here. One of the main problems we face when we shoot at night, for example when we photograph the Milky Way or star trails, it's when we get a too dark and too noisy foreground in the photo. This can be corrected by planning your night shot to have the moon to add light in the foreground, by adding artificial light, for example using two LED panels, by shooting your foreground shot in blue hour, and here my friend Rachel Jones-Ross is a true expert. And there is one last option, which is to shoot a long exposure for the foreground at night. A long exposure at low ISO, which is the technique I want to show you in this video. So when you're out there shooting at night, you make sure to go back home with a great and awesome and clean and very detailed shot for the foreground to blend with your sky shot. Well, it's not a surprise that the secret behind a well-executed long exposure for the foreground at night is to use a low ISO to prevent noise. I'm talking about ISOs of 100, 200 or 400 max. And to use a long exposure time to capture as much light as possible to get the photo correctly exposed. The exposure time can go from 1 minute to several minutes, 5, 6, 7 minutes, depending on the amount of light available in the scene. So the question is there a way to quickly calculate the exposure time you need to use for your long exposures? Because the last thing you want is to waste your precious time in a lot of trial and error, shooting several long exposures of 3, 4, 7 minutes until you find the right exposure time to get the exposure right. That's a waste of time. The good news is that the answer is yes. There is a quickly way to calculate the exposure time you need. Just use the PhotoPills exposure pill, the exposure calculator. Let's see how it works. Let's tap on the exposure calculator. Now imagine that you're out there facing the scene you want to photograph. On the calculator, tap on calculate and choose the parameter you want to calculate. In this case, we're going to choose the shutter speed. We're going to choose the shutter speed, the exposure time. We want to calculate the exposure time in this case for our long exposure at night. Now it's time to take a test shot that gives you a foreground correctly exposed. You want the test shot to be fast, very fast, just a few seconds. So you open the aperture to f2.8 or f4 maximum. You set a fast shutter speed, for example 4 seconds, and push the ISO up to 8,000, 10,000 or more. Then you take a test shot and check the histogram. If the foreground is underexposed, you push the ISO up. If the foreground is overexposed, then you push the ISO down. And you keep taking fast test shots until you get the ISO that gives you the foreground correctly exposed. Check the histogram to make sure that the foreground is correctly exposed, of course. Imagine that the settings for the test photo are f2.8, so let's set the aperture to f2.8 here, cool. The shutter speed, let's say that it's 4 seconds, and the ISO, set it to 10,000. So in this case, you took a test shot of f2.8, 4 seconds of exposure time and ISO 10,000, and you got a correctly exposed foreground, a really cool histogram for the foreground. But of course, the test settings are not the settings you're going to use for the final photo, because the photo is going to be super noisy at this level of ISO. Now it's time to decide the parameters you want to use for the final photo and work out and calculate the equivalent exposure time. The exposure time we'll need to use for the photo to have the same exposure as the test setting photo. Let's do it! Okay, the next step is to introduce in the calculator the settings you want to use for the final photo. We introduce it as the equivalent settings. So imagine that you want to use the same aperture, f2.8, for the final photo of the foreground, of course. The ISO, I think ISO 100 is great. We want a low ISO to prevent noise. And filters, we don't want filters, so I'm gonna set the filters to 0. You can use these filters here, the ND filters, to work out the equivalent exposure time you need to use when shooting a long exposure at daytime using an ND filter, for example a seascape shot. You can use the same calculator, the exposure calculator, to work out the equivalent exposure time you need when shooting long exposures at daytime. Actually, if you wish to learn how to use this calculator to work out exposure times using ND filters, watch this video. Great, I've set the aperture to 2.8, ISO 100, no filters, and I get the shutter speed, the exposure time in the table of results, 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Now, if you think that 6 minutes is too much, you can, for example, push the ISO up a little bit to ISO 200, and you will get a shutter speed exposure time of 3 minutes and 20 seconds. So, if you use an aperture of 2.8, ISO 200, and a shutter speed of 3 minutes 20 seconds, you'll get the same histogram, the same exposure value, the same exposure for the foreground as the test shot here. So your photo will be correctly exposed, your foreground will be correctly exposed, and with no noise or very little noise because you're using a very low ISO. So it's time to shoot and enjoy. Now you wish to learn how to shoot long exposures in daytime and at nighttime, I invite you to download and read and study our super detailed long exposure photography guide. I'm gonna leave a link in the description of this video and in the first comment below. Download it. And as always, if you like this video, give me a like, subscribe, and I'll see you next Wednesday in another video. And remember that you have the power to imagine, plan, and shoot legendary photos. Bye.